Welcome to the Talent Show. Hello, people. I hope you are doing well. Fantastic. I am told you changes will still be moving on. Back in my regular home setup, so you can expect this kind of background a little bit more as we continue to progress throughout the season. It's just good to be back, man. Just good to be back in front of this camera, not as the interviewee as I have been for so long, and just back as the interviewer. It's just a good time, man. And I'm loving every bit of it so far. And this episode is gonna be really special. We'll get into it more, but let me quit talking so much and introduce our guest, Mr. Tim Kiely. Woo!
How's it going, everybody? That was a grand entrance. I appreciate it.
I appreciate that, man. This is very just special for so many different ways for me, man. And I just can't appreciate you for joining me enough. And how are you doing, man? Before I get too far into
Everything's great. Everything's great. I'm retired and not missing the late nights. When I was the only sober person driving home in Atlanta highways, so after 2 a.m. shows, but I miss the guys and the fun we had. I go down. I pop into the studio every once in a while and hang out with the fellas. But other than that, everything's good.
That's awesome, man. TK, if you don't mind, just really quickly for the viewers that may not know a lot about you, just give them a brief information about yourself. Just maybe where you're from, what you've done in your lifetime, just to get you where you are today. Just some things to kind of introduce you to people watching.
Well, if you can tell by my hat, I'm from Pittsburgh. I was born there, and my dad had a job with the Steelers when I was a kid. And so I was a ball boy at Steelers camp during the 70s when they had the great teams that won 4 Super Bowls. And that was a, life-changing experience for a 12, 14-year-old kid. I went off to college, went to school in Columbia University in New York City. And that was a great experience just because, as I tell people, when you go to a school like that, you get 2 educations. You get one from the school and you get one from the city. So, I was always confident about my abilities to move around the city when I think a lot of people, it takes a while because they're intimidated because they're older and they're not as accepting as you are when you're 17 or 18. It's a wide open canvas. So, it was a lot of fun and, that was great. And then I had to move back to Pittsburgh. I couldn't get a job in New York as much as I wanted to. But I was back in Pittsburgh that summer after I graduated. And a friend of mine, we were playing summer hoops, and a friend of mine told me that there was a job opening at a TV station in Pittsburgh, local ABC affiliate called WTAE. And, maybe that would be something I'd like to try out for interview for. And at that point, Dale and I always tell people, younger folks not to worry about having a rock solid plan, because I had none. All I knew was after doing a ton of interviews, I didn't want to be a salesman. And I'm a lousy bullshitter. So, it was not something I could do, but this particular job paid nothing. It was almost 100-hour weeks, but I didn't care because I was learning the business, and it was great. And then after that, I made a few stops, but eventually I got my way to ESPN. I was there for 4 years, and then Turner. ESPN was a very difficult place to work. There was a lot of good about it, but after a while, it wears thin on you. Living in Connecticut, sorry if you're from Connecticut, anybody who's listening, but it wears you down a little bit. And I was looking from about probably my second year on, I was looking intensely to try to get another job, and the job opened at Turner in the late 90s, and I took the job there. And the rest is history with Charles coming on, Ernie and Kenny, and then Shaq. And we've been kind of riding that wave for 2 decades. So it's been great.
I usually start my conversation just kind of at the beginning, but honestly, I want to start with retirement. How is retirement treating you? And and how have you adapted to not working anymore? I know you said working for so long and been working at a young age. What is life now? Just kind of relaxing and enjoying life a little bit more without all the nicks and crannies.
Well, I haven't set the alarm clock since last March, or I'm sorry, last July when they was my last day. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't set an alarm clock. I go to bed when I want. I wake up when I want. If I want to go play golf, I go play golf.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to cook, I'll cook. The things that I like to do, those types of activities, are now there's more time, and it, for a lot of people, they struggle with it, um, because there just isn't it's just really hard to fill the day,
Yeah.
like you did when you were working. But I don't miss it. It's up to me now to be as creative, with my own personal life as I tried to be with my work life,
Mm-hmm.
and come up with stuff that will keep my, pique my interest and keep me going. And I don't know, that could be knitting, that could be, you know, jumping out of airplanes. Who knows? We'll see what happens. But I'm definitely traveling a lot, and wanting to see parts of the world that was always interesting to me. Like my wife and I just got back from Iceland, which is a fantastic place. So going to places like that are on the bucket list, or the things that I'm focused on.
That's amazing, man. And I'm glad you found a piece of happiness while doing it. I know my grandfather just retired less than I would say 6 months ago, and he's enjoying every aspect of it too. So I love to just hear that
That's
you guys
good.
are just enjoying this afterlife and not kind of suffering from not, doing something that you love for so long, man.
No,
Uh,
it's definitely there. It's definitely something that again, as I said, I was never a planner.
yeah,
And I didn't really plan a whole lot other than I knew I wanted to travel. But there's only so many golf balls you can hit or trips you can take, and you do need to fill up the things. And so I've been doing some speaking and doing podcasts like this one, and Ernie and Charles have a podcast on Thursdays on the show, and they have me come on and do a silly segment making fun of Charles. But stuff like that just keeps me in the sort of keeps the toe in the waters. And but who knows? I mean, once my contract, the buyout runs out, which is in a few months, maybe I'll start working again, and we'll, or doing something half working, like consulting or whatever. So we'll see.
I got you, man. TK, talk about growing up in Pittsburgh, man. What was your life like in Pittsburgh growing up? What was your love for sports like? And when did that, evolution for maybe you wanting to become in TV, working TV come for you? When did that come into fruition for you as well?
Well, like I said, when I was young, pre-teenage or just early teenage years, my dad would bring me down to the stadium, Three Rivers Stadium at that point, and
Mhm.
you know, work, and I worked the summer camps as a ball boy. So I was around these, titanic figures. I mean, Terry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Joe Green, Jack Lambert, you name it. And there were these huge figures that I eventually started to see that they weren't really any different from most people. Once
Yeah.
you saw them up close, they were just young men trying to make it, like we all are,
Mhm.
at some point in our life. They just happened to be on television playing a game that they loved. So I think that had a profound impact on me. And when I worked games, I was in the truck, the television truck, and my job was simple, just to go get statistics. And, there were no computers or anything, but I would go get stats or make sure somebody had enough coffee in their cup or get a hot dog or whatever it was. But it exposed me to the business. And, I played football because I was around it so much, but it wasn't too long before I learned that I was not going to be a very good football player. So there was something else to learn about. It was an early. I was about 14. I was a freshman or a sophomore at a school called Central Catholic High School, and I had played quarterback and I had a pretty good arm. I was a baseball player too, and had a good arm. Thought maybe I'll play quarterback. And we started to throw 7-on-7 drills, and there was this kid, a big, tall, skinny kid, about 6'3", throwing bullets, right? And so I turned to somebody and said, "Who is that?" He said, "Oh, he's a freshman from St. Regis. His name's Dan Marino." So I took one look at that and said to the coaches, "Hey, fellas, can I play defense?" Because I wasn't going to be playing any quarterback with him. And, that taught me, if that's what a pro looks like up close, then I better start studying algebra, because I'm going to need to graduate and work in the business. And, what I discovered later, sort of haphazardly, was that there are just so many jobs you can do in sports that are still tied to sports, public relations, marketing, television, radio, the internet. I mean, anything that keeps you tied to it was a blessing for me, because it was something I was interested in. I'm not a numbers guy. I was never somebody that watched the stock market every day and, all that sort of stuff, probably to my detriment, but I'm cleaning up that mess now, and we'll go from there. But it was just the joy of being around sports and being around the kind of people that, I understood what it was all about. I understood the sacrifices that these guys made, and I understood how much they put of their life they put into it, physically and mentally. It was a challenge, and it was fun. And when I went to this interview at WTAE, I was 22 years old, and I had never worked in television other than as a runner with my dad. I did not study journalism in college. They didn't offer it at Columbia. I was an English major. And my first interview was with eventually who ended up being my first boss at the local TV station. His first question was, "What do you know about television?" And I said, "Well, I know how to turn it on." And then I went into a spiel where, veins are popping, and I'll learn anything. I'll wash your car, whatever it takes, all that sort of stuff. And he, at the end of the interview, said, "You sound like you're crazy enough to work 100 hours a week and hardly get paid." And I said, "That's me." So, that's kind of where that all developed and where it went to.
TK, you mentioned your father quite a lot. What impact did your parents have on your life, and what were some of the things that they've taught you that maybe still stick with you today, and that you've maybe used throughout your lifetime to just keep you motivated and keep you kind of on the right path of life?
Well, I mean, my dad was a World War II veteran. He was wounded. He, fought in some terrible fights, and he was from that generation of people who, the greatest generation, as they're called, that don't regale you with war stories. It was all stuff that, as my dad would say, "Why would I want to talk about that? I already lived through it and barely made it," and so he was sort of a stoic and quiet person, and my mother was the exact opposite. She unfortunately, she was the life of the party. She was a lot of fun, everything like that. But unfortunately, she became ill with what was then known as manic depression, and today it's bipolar depression, or whatever mental health term you want to put on it. But she would begin to behave very, very erratically, and it was a very difficult thing for a preteen, 10, 12-year-old boy to not be able to have someone in your life that you could count on that everybody else had. So what my dad taught me was, pick yourself up and tough it out, kind of a thing. And my mother was all about having a good time until she got sick. And when she got sick, it really motivated me, Dalen, to want to get out of the house. And I wanted to leave, and I wanted to go out on my own. And obviously I couldn't do that till college, but there was no question in my high school years that I was going to leave Pittsburgh and go someplace. And it ended up being New York City, which was tremendous because, again, I was able to do whatever I wanted, go, crawl through the city and find out every nook and cranny. And it was great. And, it was just a tough time for me, having to deal with my mother when I would come home, because I had to, make sure she took her medicines and, stuff like that. It was unpleasant, to be honest with you, that I wished I didn't have to do, but it taught me a lot about empathy. It taught me a lot about caring for others and trying to understand people and understanding, mental health issues and what they mean, I think your generation has a whole new set of,
Yeah.
of mental health problems to deal with. It. The internet can cause that. I am not some old man who sits on the front lawn and bitches about the internet. I think it's one of the most brilliant things in the world, and I think that your generation will figure it out, and it'll be a very positive thing. But it can be very stressful, and it can give you a sort of warped view of life that you don't want to have.
Yeah. I want to jump the gun with that question that I asked. What has being a husband and a father been meaningful? How meaningful has that been for you? What has that meant to be a father and a husband? And what were some of the challenges and joy things that you grew up with that maybe that you had to teach your own kids as well, that you maybe had to face as a kid?
Well, I think, couldn't be prouder as a father. I have 27-year-old twins, boy and a girl. They're doing great. They're both working. But I think that my wife and I think I can safely say we did a pretty good job keeping them on the straight and narrow, not with a lot of, screaming and yelling and discipline and all that sort of stuff, but with an understanding that, we wanted them to know what our problems were, like my mother's, and that these things were in their gene pool, that they could be things that they might have to deal with at some point. And, I mean, I've dealt with depression and anxiety, because it's in my DNA to have it. And we wanted to talk about that and make sure that they got as good a start as they could get, both in high school and college. And we were able to do that. So, I'm very proud of the fact that my wife and I have the greatest marriage in the world, basically because she tells me everything to do and I just shut up and do it, but I think our bond is such that, we're unafraid to have really frank conversations with the kids. And we were doing it earlier in life than I think our parents did, because, my parents were from again, a generation of people that didn't really reach out in those situations, that they were, once they gave birth to you, it was go outside, don't come home till the lights come on, that kind of thing. And they didn't know where we were or what we were doing, which was fun. But, there's a balance, I think, that we've been able to strike where we're not helicopter parents, but we're at least aware of what's up and what's going on, and we're honest with them.
I love that. That's real, and I love that because I've dealt with my different battles of depression and anxiety, and so I think just you saying that and honestly being aware of that is a true testament to where we are in today's time. So I love that you said that. JK, I have a very fun relationship with the city of New York. My mom and I visited every year for Christmas. I almost honestly went to school up there. What was Columbia like for you, man? And also, what was the processes of you picking Columbia maybe over other different schools? What was that process like, and how did New York change your life?
Well, I mean, when I was picking schools, I I applied to, I don't know, 5 or 6 schools, northeastern schools. A couple of them were Ivy League. A couple of them, I had really good grades. I did well, and again, I was highly motivated to do well in school because I wanted to go away.
Yeah.
And I mean, that sounds a little cold. I hope it doesn't, but it's just, I wanted to get out of the situation I was in. So I was highly, highly motivated. But I also was going to try to play football and see if I could, walk on or do something on one of these teams. So it came down to believe it or not, Notre Dame or Pitt or Columbia. I applied to Notre Dame because, hey, I'm Irish Catholic, Timothy Michael Patrick, so got to apply to Notre Dame, and I got in. And much to the chagrin of my Irish family, I decided, no, I don't want to go there, because my sister pulled me aside, and she had just graduated from college. And she said, if you go to Notre Dame, you're going to go be around the same types of folks that you went to high school with. Yeah. Irish Catholic, Polish Catholic, Italian Catholic kids, you know, only a couple of African-American kids. And there was no diversity in my high school. And it was like, you're going to go to a bigger version of your high school. That struck a chord with me, because I wanted to have a different experience. And once they turned me loose in New York City, I mean, I can't even begin to tell you, Dale, and what it was like. Like, you can imagine, having visited at Christmas, the magic that it's like at Christmas. Yeah. Well, imagine being 17 and your whole goal in life was to get away and be on your own and try it out, and doing it in New York, where you could do anything. You could walk down the street with no clothes on, and it wouldn't faze anybody. So, my favorite New York story was, you know, in my era, you don't see it as much now. They've cleaned it up, but in my era, if you rode the subway, there was constantly people bumming money off, trying to bum money off you, you know, sell you something, give me some money, whatever. And of course, you learn to thick skin and get out of here, you know, and all that other stuff. But we were riding in a subway someplace, and the door between the train cars opened up, and this guy stepped in with a big bass, like a tuba, you know. It was this big old instrument, and it looked like it'd been run over by a bus. So he sat there and he blew one note, right? And it was like a cow giving birth. It was actually painful to our ears. And he stopped and he said, if you don't give me money, I'm going to keep playing. I thought that was the greatest scam of all time. So we gave money and said, you're all right with us, pal. So, you know, it was that kind of a place. But you just see crazy stuff happening all the time, and it just became part of your life.
Did you have any immediate goals after college? Did you have anything that you feel like, this is exactly what I want to do, and if I don't get to it, I failed? Or was it just I'm just going to live life the way it is?
Yeah, I was just, you know, I mean, I didn't want to go home. I wanted to go someplace, and I, you know, obviously New York, I loved it and I wanted to stay. I really didn't have a plan. I mean, I didn't go to school to be a journalist. I went to school to get a college degree so I could, you know, take the next step. I could have majored in history or whatever. I mean, English was one of the majors, and I felt like I was a decent writer. So I took that up as part of it. But I didn't have a plan. And you know, that didn't scare me. I mean, I think a lot of people get very, you know, in 5 years, I have to be doing this or I'm a failure. I think there's just too many variables in life and too many turns you take to make those kind of plans in my mind. Now, other people, I knew guys that when the first day they walked into Columbia, they were going to be an engineer, and they're engineers today, 50 years later. I also know people who walked in and they were going to be doctors, and after the first half year of courses, they were like, I ain't going to make it. I'm not going to be a doctor. And they switched majors. So, and everything in between, you know, I mean, people who went into business and made a lot of money, and then all turned around and became priests, you know, because they wanted to give back. They were tired of giving money. I mean, life will take you anywhere, and who knows? I mean, just be ready for the ride. And you know, if you have a plan, great, but be very, very conscious of being able to change and switch gears.
As someone that, you know, just trying to be in the journalism world, I just feel like I felt so much, just being plastered so much in front of the camera. And I think the work that is done behind the camera is just as important as what's done in front of the camera. What was your first job like for TV? And also, was it a love at first sight type of relationship, or did you have to kind of gradually get into it? What was your first TV job like, and how did you enjoy the process of kind of getting to where you were?
Well, as you probably know, I mean, in most networks, the ABCs or Turners or ESPNs of the world, the entry level job is a production assistant,
Yes.
is the title. And you do everything. You rip scripts, you cut highlights, work with the graphics people, you do all sorts of stuff, and try to learn all the basics of television. That's basically what I did at the local TV station. I mean, anything that had to do with the sportscasts, I would do it. And then eventually, we did. They were flush with money. Local TV stations had tons of money back in the day. It got eaten alive by cable, just like cable's being eaten alive now by streaming.
Yeah.
Local TV got eaten alive by cable. So, but before that happened, which was about a 5-year span, I was working there. I got to produce football games. I had no idea what I was doing. But I got to produce election coverage, and screw it all up and learn. And, nobody fired me, and, I just worked my butt off. But any opportunity to do anything, I don't care if you want to be on TV or behind the scenes, if you have a chance to work weather, take the gig. If you have a chance to work news, take the gig, and learn all you can, because you want to be as well-rounded as possible and be able to understand editing and what real editing means, which is not just shortening things up. It's also being conscious of, you're doing a story on a murder. You better make sure your facts are right. And you use the word allegedly so you don't get sued. But it's those types of things that I learned in local TV that really, really helped me.
TK, I'm a huge music lover, and so I love to ask people, what are some of their favorite music artists, favorite bands, maybe some of their favorite songs. So what are, through your lifetime, who have been some of your favorite music artists, and what are some of your go-to things to play?
Oh, I mean, I'm a 60s and 70s. I'm a child of the 60s. Everybody's older brother played the music from the 60s, and so I grew up, my go-to band was the Allman Brothers, the Doors, the Rolling Stones, Traffic. Some of these I know you haven't heard of, but they were great bands, and to me there was so much breakthroughs happening because I remember my dad, he was a 40s guy, so he listened to swing music. And so there was a famous band, Benny Goodman and his band, and Benny Goodman played the flute. And so he would go off on these long jams like a jazz band. And I'd say to my dad, listen to Benny Goodman play. That's what Jimi Hendrix does with a guitar. Right. Of course, that couldn't have pissed him off more than anything in the world, to compare Benny Goodman to some guy, a goofball named Jimi Hendrix. But I said, listen, if you listen to his guitar solo, it sounds like Benny Goodman. So, I mean, the basis of the change in music was I think in the early 50s and late 50s, that it morphed from, very, very scripted music to, just people jamming. So those were some of the bands that influenced me. And, those are ones I are go-to that, and by the way, I love 40 swing music. I think it's fantastic. But I mean, Frank Sinatra, you may not appreciate him now, but someday you listen to him, you'll know that that dude was something special, and so Elvis, I mean, the Beatles, all those types of bands that changed the world, I think, you know, we're all favorites of mine.
I'm a big Sinatra fan, so I always appreciate when someone says that. I'm not too familiar with a lot that you just said, but I did enjoy the storytelling of it all. So I found a piece of laughter of it. TK, you were introduced to Turner, and within that introduction, you were also introduced to Ernie Johnson. Uh, what was your transition like to Turner from ESPN, and also what was your relationship like with EJ from the start, man? Was it I've seen this, from the base of the start of my life, just you the four guys, but was everything always perfect? I feel like the guys have always had such a great relationship, but was everything always, just love and joy? But I know there had to be some types of, bumps in the way
I'm
of the journey.
sure. Yeah, I got there in the summer of '95, and that fall I was actually hired to produce. TNT at the time had an NFL football,
Mhm.
Sunday Night Football, which, if you can
Yeah.
believe, they gave that up, which was one of the dumber business decisions of all time. But I was working on the football show, and uh, the NBA, inside the NBA, was kind of a afterthought. Like, we did it, and I produced it. It was a single game in those days, and then we would do a highlight show. But you can imagine, if they come on the air at 7, at 10 o'clock when the highlight show came on, most of the games are still playing. So you could only do partial highlights. It was sort of a limitation. And excuse me, Ernie anchored that show, and he was by himself. So he had to script a lot of stuff, and that's the way we were taught. Everything was scripted, and I just didn't. I wanted a freewheeling show, and so I started to bring in guests, players that were coming in town to play the Hawks, and if Gary Payton was available, he'd come down to the studio, even just to do pregame.
Yeah.
And I wanted Ernie to stop writing so much, because to me, the prompter becomes anchor crack.
Yeah.
They have to have it. Meanwhile, Ernie preps so well that he doesn't need it, and he's more quick-witted when he's natural, but he didn't believe it, and I couldn't convince him. So one night early on in our relationship, I just turned the prompter off. And we did a show where he was just wheeling it with his notes. And I said, I don't care. Don't look at cameras. Don't worry about any of that stuff. Just be Ernie Johnson.
Yeah.
Well, every segment, Dale, and his ears got more and more red. I started to see smoke coming out of his ears. The Ernie Johnson that people know today had a hot temper back in those days. So, excuse me, the show ended. I chased him down. I figured he was going to be pissed off. He wouldn't even acknowledge me. He just kept walking. He wouldn't turn around. Down the hallway we went, out of the studio, kept going. I'm like, Ernie, it was good. It was good. You felt, you're using your ad lib skills, blah, 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 blah. He wasn't having any of it. He went into the bathroom. So I said, am I supposed to go in there, or what's going on? So I said, screw it. And I went in, opened the door. And as I opened the door, a coffee cup whistled by my head. He had thrown it in anger, not at me. He didn't know I was coming through the door, but he threw it and smashed it against the wall. Wow. There was some poor guy in there going to the bathroom, taking a dump, and he sprinted out of the bathroom. And so we weren't going to solve anything that night. And what I did was I went out and bought a coffee cup the next day. And it said "Going Postal" on it, which was a reference to, for some reason during the '90s, the post office guys would go crazy and act out at work. So I gave him this cup that said "Going Postal," and he laughed. And then he said in separate interviews that was the moment that he said, "This guy gets it. Maybe I should listen to him." And that was really the start of it. I mean, he still writes stuff like if there's a criminal thing that we have to deal with, or someone passing away, you write that stuff. But the conversation you know, the prompter, just say we talk, nothing else, and let them, you know, let everybody have a part of the conversation.
I love that because I love the show so much, and and a lot of times on social media I'll see people say like the show is like 80% laughs, 10% analysis on the game, and then like 10% Chuck versus Shaq. And so to hear you say that just kind of it just shows the evolution of where things started and how they got here. When and I want to ask kind of a similar question as well. How did the guys flow together when they all came? I know Kenny came a few years later after you got there, and then Chuckin came, and then Shaq a little bit later. What was the relationship like when each one came? How did it work out when they first got started, and how did it become what it is today?
Well, you know, I think that the most underrated and the guy that gets the least credit for the chemistry of the show is Kenny. You know, he might be the world's greatest counterpuncher. He's like Roy Jones, or
Yeah.
you know, Floyd Mayweather. I mean, you throw a haymaker at him, he dodges it, and then pop, he comes back with something. He never lets Charles off the hook when Charles says something crazy, because he's listening. And that's the key to the show to me is I don't want them to look at cameras. I don't want them to I want them to look at who they're talking to, and that maintain that connection. Like you and I are talking to each other now. Yeah. Well, if I turned this way and started to talk to a camera, we've broken our connection. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're not listening to me. You're just saying, I'm saying in my head, I have to turn to camera 3. No matter what Dalen says, I have to turn to camera 3 and read the prompter. Well, then you get generic answers, and you get, he's a fine young man and he goes to his left well, which, you know, my grandmother could tell me if she watched 5 minutes of the game. So, you know, but Kenny, it came naturally. He didn't even need to be told to do it. He just kind of threw stuff out there and, you know, and changed the way, the guest was supposed to act. So when he came, we started to do a lot of gags and have some fun and do different things. And, you know, Charles knew he wanted to be in television, and we were on about a year or year and a half with Kenny. And then we would have assorted guests that came in, and Kenny was great with the guests. And, you know, we pull out old high school pictures with bad haircuts and anything to loosen the dudes up, so they didn't feel like they were on television. They just felt like they were at a bar with their pals talking. That was the idea. So we wanted to create that kind of atmosphere. Kenny helped immensely with that. And then Charles was headed to NBC when he got hurt his final year and had to ride out the season. And then he was going to go to NBC the next year. And one of the guys in our office who knew him from Nike, a guy named Michael Jackson, who used to play guard for Georgetown when the Patrick Ewing years, he worked for us and he worked for Nike. And he said, hey, do me a favor, just come meet with Turner. Even though I know you're pretty much all set. So he came down to Atlanta, Charles. We all took him out, got him drunk as hell, and smoked cigars all night long. And he said in the middle of the night, he woke up in a cold sweat from a hangover, called his agent and said, I think I'm changing my mind. So that was that. And, you know, we just rolled from there. And then when Shaq came, you know, I mean, that was an arrival of its own. I mean, you know.
If you had maybe just, you know, maybe 3, 4, 5 of some of you, what would be some of your favorite moments throughout your entire time with Turner? What would be some of your favorite moments of the show?
Oh God, there's so many. I would say if you look up Charles Barkley diaper change.
Oh yeah.
If you've ever seen that. The Champions Club was another one. Charles Barkley, the Champions Club, where we made the studio into a disco.
Yeah,
with,
I remember.
You know, only champions allowed, and he wasn't allowed to come in. there was Charles Barkley holding his breath. He tried to do. There's a magician named David Blaine who, he's one of those Mysterio guys that gets into the thing of water all chained up, and he holds his breath for 8 minutes. Charles wanted to hold his breath, and he told me to get him a fish tank. And we got a fish tank, and he made 23 seconds, and he came up. That was as much as he could do. God, when Charles ate up all the time in a segment, and he kept interrupting Shaq, and Shaq got pissed off and said, "It's not supposed to be 1-2, 1-2 back to 1. It's supposed to be 1-2-3." And he was actually hot, like he was pissed. And it was tremendous. It made for the greatest television. There was another one where, if you look up Charles and Shaq, police presence, there was a game. I think it was Detroit, and I can't remember who was in the game, but the Clippers were in it, I think, maybe. And our sideline reporter did a report at the end of the game because it was real chippy and there were fights and all sorts of stuff. And she was in the hallway, and she was saying that, the players are still trying to get at each other, and they've called the police. There's a police presence. And Charles and Shaq just fell out laughing about how they played all these years in the NBA, and now you have to have the police come in and handle these situations. So, oh God, that's I would tell you that if you want to get a yuck, look up Charles, the LeBron haircut bit where we Charles kept torturing LeBron about wearing his headband higher and higher to cover his bald spot. And we took the interview from the decision. I think it's actually called The Decision on, Turner Sports, The Decision. But he had a checked shirt on, and he answered all the questions from Jim Gray about, he sat there bullshitting for an hour until he finally said, "I'm taking my talents to Miami." So we made fun of it we took one of our associate directors who had a shirt just like him, and we shot him from behind, and then we used LeBron's answers from the actual press conference. But instead of them asking him, it was Ernie asking the questions. Instead of it being about basketball, it was about cutting his hair. And it turned out brilliant. And Kenny walked off the set crying, laughing, and it was a great moment.
I love that. And they're all just like vividly stowed in my head because I've seen them so many times. What my favorite, and I'm sure you remember this pretty vividly, but if people don't know this, Underdog, who works for Turner as well, and I think It was like the tugboat joke, and I think that was probably my favorite scene ever. Just the whole laughter from the guys and Underdog's reaction to the cameras. I think that's probably.
I was in the truck. We were in Golden State, so we were by the San Francisco Bay, and one of the camera guys said, "Hey, Joe's talking to these girls." So, we always make fun of Joe, and he's great with it. And he's become kind of a character, which is an idea I stole from David Letterman's show. He would make the stage, like the stage manager or the cameraman, he would put him in the show. And, they just would stand there looking goofy and was always funny. And so Joe became this character that we would use, as from watching the show. We'd have him do stuff, and Charles would torture him and all sorts of stuff like that. And but yeah, one of the guys gave me the heads up that they had put together. One of our tape guys had put together a sequence of Joe hitting on these girls, and then the tugboat, which shooting water out of it, like it was hilarious scene. So they put it together, and I didn't ask him to do it. I just was laughing so hard. We were in break, and there was about 30 seconds to go, and I said to myself, "Am I going to do this or not?" And then I said, fuck it. And I rolled it coming out. I just said, "Ernie, here's Joe picking up chicks." And when they saw the tugboat shooting water, they fell out, and it was beautiful. But I made a few decisions like that where I thought this might be the end of me. But it was worth it. I didn't care. It was fun.
I love that, and I love that just talking about Ernie in the beginning, that you didn't care about being politically correct, and I think that sometimes is what's wrong with a lot of things on TV. A lot of days is everyone has to be politically correct, and they feel like you have to do this the correct way. And you kind of installed this within the team that you guys didn't really care about that. You guys were you at all times, and I've emphasized that so long on my show, that being you is so important. So I love that you shared that story, and just the true emphasis on what has been shown on the camera is just truly you guys, and you guys joke a lot and you have a lot of fun. So I love that so much.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. I mean, I honestly, Dale, and I think a lot of it comes from, we create the impromptu attitude long before the show comes on the air. And the first way we do it is, like when I worked at ESPN and other places, if you had a 8 o'clock show, you would have a meeting at noon, a meeting at 3, a meeting at 5, and then you do the show. And by the time that we would do the show, the on-air people had over-rehearsed everything. Everything sounded wooden and canned. So I wouldn't let them come to the production meeting. They didn't want to come either. I mean, it wasn't hard to tell them not to come. But, I told them I don't want them at the production meeting. And the reason was we don't want to know what they're going to say. And we don't want them to know what we're going to be planning, like the goofs that we've done. It was very funny. We had Magic Johnson on for about 2 years after he had bombed at NBC, and they over rehearsed him. They beat him to death with "Look at camera 3," and you got 30 seconds, and say something about Isaiah Thomas or whatever they were telling him. So he came to us, and I had not met him, and one of his PR people called me and put me on the line on hold, and then he jumped on, and I, gave the usual, great to have you aboard and all that stuff. And I said, it's a little different from NBC. And he said, well, what do you mean? What time is the production meeting? And I said, what production meeting? He said, we have at NBC, we had like 3 production meetings all day long, blah, blah, blah. I said, Magic, do you know what time the game is tonight? And he said, yep, 8 o'clock. I said, you know who's playing? He said, yep, Detroit and Milwaukee. I said, good. Be here at 7:55 and sit down and go. Because if I don't have to tell Magic Johnson or Charles Barkley or Kenny Smith anything about basketball that they haven't already seen.
Yeah.
The problem with most producers is they feel like it's their show, so it's going to be all their ideas. Mm-hmm. And that's so wrong, because you cut all these valuable people out that just, wait to get yelled at or wait to push a button. And, meanwhile, like Tugboat Joe, which I give you high praise for bringing that up. I'd forgotten about it. And that was always one of my favorites, because it was perfect team chemistry, which was the tape guys aren't used to being given the freedom to do whatever they want. Yeah. And that's what they did it on their own. These two, Mike Winslow and Phil Barker, who've been our tape guys since we started. They're brilliant. And they put it together because they knew it had a chance, and of course, when I saw it, it was like, go for it, but I didn't tell them to build that. They did it on their own. And so many of the things that we did were not really planned out that much. We just kind of put something in front of Charles that would explode, or put something in front of Charles that would spill water on him or whatever, and he would react, and it'd be great television.
I had the honor of doing I'm part of the play-by-play sports broadcasting camp, and they're my family, and they have much love for me, and I have much love for them. And I had the honor in like 2020 to talk to Chuck and ask him a question. I just asked him, what advice would he give all the young kids on here that are trying to be on TV one day? And he just simply had told us that don't ever try to force anything, and if you, love basketball, you know about basketball, talk about basketball, but don't try to do too many things just because you're trying to make it to the biggest top of the mountain. And I love that. And just tying it to what you're saying, is there any like piece of advice that you would give to people that are trying to make it? Because, and I say this as a part of it too, that the journalism industry is just growing so much, and I think it's just growing at a fast pace than it ever has before. Is there any advice that you would give to people that are trying to get into this type of TV industry? What advice would you give to them?
I think, again, Charles mentioned being yourself, which can be very difficult to do because we put makeup on you. We put an piece in your ear, put hot lights on you in front of a bunch of camera people, and then say, "Hey, Dalen, be yourself." There's nothing more difficult. So it's just, when you write, if you get a job where you're doing news and you do have to use prompter, if you write, don't write to be read. In other words, don't write like you're writing an English paper. Write in ... dots, where it's like, this happened on Monroe Street at 8:00, ... Police say this ... Almost like, how we say and and pause. That's the way you sound, and you'll be much more comfortable because you'll be yourself on the air, because you're not writing as if you're writing to please some English teacher. So you're using 10-syllable words. I think that's a very important thing. I would say that, contrary to what Charles says about don't take on too much, I would say to you that if you want to be on the air, I don't care what the position is. If it's the weatherman, if they say have an opening I'll do it. If they have an opening for a sports guy, I'll do it. If they have an opening for a news guy, sign me up. Try everything. Don't be afraid to fail, and you'll learn a lot more. But that's, at this stage of your career where you're starting a podcast and you're looking to take the next step. The other piece of advice I would give you is, this is a very important thing to trick. You will get to a point, no matter what the job is, whether it's on air or not, but you'll get to a point in an interview process where they say, "Dalen, it's down to you and one other person. We'll call you in a week," right? Let you know the decision. And of course, they call you in a week, and it's a huge kick in the nuts because they say, we're hiring the other person. So it's a terrible, crushing thing, but this is a lesson in turning a negative into a positive. Yeah. Now, how would you turn a negative into a positive? Well, most of us would say, "Hey, I just want to thank you for the opportunity, and please keep me in mind if anything else opens up. And what could I have done better?" Right? Those are all questions you would ask, and be very polite about it. Once they have told you that you're not the guy and it's somebody else, my thing is you switch gears. You do all those polite answers that you should do, because you never know when you're going to cross their path again, and you want to be polite. But there's one more question you should ask before you hang that phone up. The person you hired over me, where were they working? Do you see what you just did? And say no if you don't.
No.
You just created an opportunity for yourself. If they tell you, "Jalen, we're not taking you, but this guy he worked over at channel whatever," you can then pick up the phone and call channel whatever and say, "Hey, I heard one of your guys is leaving," and the guy on the other end of the phone, most of the time, doesn't even know it's happening. He's sitting there saying, "Holy shit, how did you know this?" Well, I was in a job thing for it, and I'm looking for a gig. And if you're looking for a smart guy, I'm your guy. And I got 2 jobs that way in the course of my career, where the one time a guy told me, if you're that smart and you're that ahead of the game, I don't even need to see a resume. I'll hire you. Because, I was that far ahead of the game at 26 years old, or something like that. So always remember that trick. Don't let them off the phone until they tell you where the other guy was working.
I appreciate that. And that's not just for me either. I would love for someone to watch this in hopes of also trying to do some type of TV career and would take that advice just as I'm going to take it as well. So that's just not for me. And that was honestly mind boggling. I've never thought that deep into something like that. And I appreciate you for sharing that because
Sure.
that's that's raw and that's real. And I don't think that you can get that anywhere else, man. I appreciate that so much.
No, no problem. It's one of those times when you get, like you said, it's raw and it's real. It's like a kick in the nuts, and people just throw up their hands and say, "Oh well, another rejection." No, before you complete the cycle, just say to them, "Give me the name of the company that person worked at." And as soon as you hang up the phone, brother, you're on the phone to that company saying, "I hear you have an opening." What? We have an opening? Yeah, man, we have an opening, and I'm your guy to fill it. So that's how you take a negative and turn it into a positive. And that's a way a lot of things will come up in your life. That you can deal with that rejection in a way that turns it into something positive.
I appreciate that, man. I'm never gonna forget that either. I really am not.
I hope it helps you someday.
I want to ask you, and it may not mean a lot to you, but I would be wrong if I didn't ask you. All those Emmy awards behind you, man. When you first got started at tournament, did you ever envision it being what it is and having the success that you obviously now behind you have? What was your vision for it, and also just in that moment as well, what was it like to be a part of it and be able to receive Emmys such as those behind you?
Oh, well, I mean, I think it was more, excuse me, that it was more the group of people that we put together, and to be able to say that I could get guys to run through a wall for me, that that people would kill themselves if I gave them a challenge. And I always tried to be as open as possible in meetings and stuff like that, where if Dalen came up with an idea and we couldn't use it, I tried to explain why we couldn't use it. And then if Dalen came up with an idea that we used, I made sure that everybody within shouting distance of that meeting knew that you had done it, that it was your idea. And that just, it makes people's heads explode. I had a great coach in high school, who we would go through skull sessions in football, and this guy blocks down, you do this, and the guard pulls, you do that, and all these complex things. And after he got done, he said, "All right, now you guys know what you're supposed to do. But when the game starts and the snot starts flying and the bodies start flying and you don't know what to do, just remember two things and two things only." And we were like, "What's that?" He said, "Run somewhere and hit somebody and everything will be all right." Now, you can't physically hit anybody because you'll get arrested. But the idea is go 100,000%. That's a different way of saying, go a million miles an hour, attack at all times. It's like the trick I just taught you about getting any other job. You're on the attack. You're not backing up at all. And that's the attitude you want to take with you. I wanted to impart that on people. Where, I mean, I got to be honest with Dale, and we would walk out of the building at our studio building on a Thursday, well, a Friday morning, because it would be 3 a.m. Friday morning, and people were peeing their pants laughing, right? Because of something we did like Tugboat Joe or the Champions Club, and just laughing at Charles and laughing at Shaq. And then thinking, I remember watching people walk away and it freezing cold, whatever you wanted, and saying, how great is this, that these people are enjoying themselves that much and that we can do these things. So it was great. It was great. It was just a really, really healthy atmosphere that we tried to create and let people, feel like they could speak their minds and contribute, and it would be fine.
I love it. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot with this question, but if you could have dinner with 5 people, dead or alive, who would they be and why?
Uh, who would the 5 people I would have dinner with? Uh, Love to have dinner with MLK, um, Malcolm X, because they were so different and yet their goal was the same.
Yeah.
And Ted Turner, who was I've met, I've never had dinner with him. Absolute lunatic, but so funny and so fun to be around. And if they could be all at the same table, I would put Charles at that table. And just because he would bring what he brings. And then a great friend of mine who I lost when I was 16 years old. He drowned. His name was Robert Papali, and he was one of the best athletes I ever saw. He played as a freshman with Marino, and they couldn't figure out who was the better player, just to show you how good he was. But he didn't know how to swim, and he passed away. And he went, dove in a river that was dangerous and drowned. And so I would love to have him back in my life.
That's
I think
awesome.
that's 5.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love each one of those answers for different reasons, of course. And before I ask you this one last question, I want to say thank you for joining me, man, because I've enjoyed
No
every second of
problem.
this, man. I've loved every second of this, and it is going to live with me forever, man. But one of the big things for me is legacy, and leaving a positive legacy and making sure each day that I do something, when I do it, that I do it in a positive way. What is the legacy that you want to have, that you always want people to remember about TK? And what is something that just maybe something that people maybe not know about you, but that you want them to know? What are some of the big things that you may want them to know? What's the big legacy point of view for leaving behind?
Well, I think, that I was a good and fair guy to deal with in terms of being a leader, because I had to make decisions sometimes, and they weren't all easy. Um, but I was fair, and I think the other thing I would want people to say is, again, forgive me for cursing, but that was one funny motherfucker. If they talked about me in those terms, being one funny son of a bitch, that would be what I'd want.
I love that. I really do, man. And I've honestly gotten to see that with you just in this hour that we've talked, man. And I can't appreciate you for more, man. I'm glad I reached out to your son, and I'm glad that we were able to get in contact and do this, man. This has probably been one of my favorite interviews in 4 years of doing this. And so I'm just grateful to have you, and I appreciate it of you being on and joining me today, man.
It's my pleasure, Dale, and I'm glad to have spent some time with you. And it gives me energy to when I'm anytime you're around youth, it's a good thing for an old fart like me to dive back in, whether it's with advice or whether it's with listening to your world and trying to incorporate it into mine, because you can't stop growing or you're 6 feet under. So
Yeah.
you might as well listen and grow.
Yeah, I appreciate you so much, man, and I hope you continue to enjoy retirement, man, and continue learning something in the midst of your retirement as well. So continue living every blessing as well, too, man.
All right, you got it, Dale, and no problem. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, man. Appreciate you so much, TK, and thank you guys for tuning in, man. I have loved every second of this, and I hope you've enjoyed it, man. Keep learning, keep loving life, and keep working towards whatever your end goal is, man. Just keep enjoying every moment of it, and take chances, as TK has said, man. Take every opportunity and take a chance with it. So, God bless to you all, man, and thank you so much, TK. I've enjoyed it, man. God bless you guys.